Before 1908, the automobile was a toy for the wealthy. It was hand-built, expensive, unreliable, and required a personal mechanic to maintain. Fewer than 200,000 cars existed in the entire United States, in a country of nearly 90 million people. Most Americans had never sat in one. Most never expected to. After 1920, the car was no longer a luxury. It was a basic tool of daily life. More than 8 million Model Ts were on American roads. Farmers used them to haul goods to market. Factory workers drove them to jobs that did not exist 15 years earlier. Families moved to houses miles from the nearest city center because a car could close the distance in minutes. Roads were being paved, gas stations were being built, suburbs were being planned. An entire way of living that had never existed before was spreading across the country at a speed no one had predicted. One company made that happen. One man designed the system that produced it. His name was Henry Ford. He did not invent the automobile. Dozens of engineers in Europe and America built working cars before he did. What Ford did was something no one else had attempted. He figured out how to manufacture a complex machine so efficiently that its price dropped every single year until a working-class family could afford one. In doing so, he did not just change transportation. He restructured the American economy, the American landscape, and the daily routine of ordinary people in ways that are still visible in every direction you look today. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how Ford built that system, what it cost, who it helped, who it damaged, and why the world you live in right now is still shaped by decisions one man made in a factory in Highland Park, Michigan, over 100 years ago. In the late 1800s, transportation in the United States was defined by two things: the railroad and the horse. Railroads moved goods and people between cities, but they operated on fixed schedules along fixed routes. If you needed to travel somewhere a rail line did not go, you walked, rode a horse, or hired a horse-drawn carriage. In rural areas, which is where the majority of Americans still lived, a trip to the nearest town could take half a day each way. The horse was not just a mode of transport, it was an economic system. Entire industries existed to support it. Blacksmiths, saddle makers, feed suppliers, stable operators, veterinarians, and carriage builders all depended on the horse economy. Cities were designed around horses. Streets were sized for carriages. Public sanitation systems existed largely to manage horse waste. In New York City alone, horses produced over 2 million pounds of manure per day. The automobile had existed in experimental form since the 1880s. Carl Benz in Germany built the first gasoline-powered car in 1885. By the mid-1890s, several American companies were producing cars in small numbers. But these were handcrafted machines, assembled one at a time by skilled mechanics. A single car could take weeks to build. Prices ranged from $1,000 to $3,000 at a time when the average American worker earned roughly $400 a year. The automobile, as it existed, was structurally inaccessible to most of the population. The men building and selling these early cars did not see this as a problem. The automobile industry in 1900 was modeled after the luxury goods market. Manufacturers targeted wealthy buyers who wanted custom features, fine materials, and personal service. Production was slow by design. Exclusivity was the point. The idea that a factory worker or a farmer should be able to buy a car was not part of the business model. It was not even part of the conversation. Henry Ford grew up on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan, born in 1863. His mother died when he was 13. His father expected him to take over the family farm. Ford hated farming. What he loved was machinery. He spent his childhood taking apart watches, rebuilding them, and fixing every mechanical device he could find. At 16, he left the farm and walked to Detroit to work as an apprentice machinist. Over the next 2 decades, Ford worked as an engineer, a machinist, and eventually a chief engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company. He built his first gasoline-powered vehicle, the quadricycle, in a shed behind his home in 1896. He drove it through the streets of Detroit at 4 in the morning because the shed door was too small and he had to knock out part of the wall to get it out. Ford did not have an engineering advantage over other early car builders. His machines were functional, but not exceptional. What separated Ford from his competitors was a single belief that he held with absolute certainty, and that almost no one in the industry shared. The automobile should not be a product for the rich. It should be a product for everyone. The path to dominance was not higher prices and better features. It was lower prices and higher volume. If you could make a car cheap enough, the market was not thousands of wealthy buyers. The market was millions of ordinary people. This idea was not just unpopular, it was considered foolish. Ford's early financial backers wanted him to build expensive, high-margin cars. When he refused, they withdrew their funding. His first 2 companies failed. Investors walked away because Ford would not abandon his fixation on a low-cost car for the mass market. In 1903, Ford started the Ford Motor Company with $28,000 raised from a small group of investors. For the first several years, the company produced a range of models at various price points. But Ford was working towards something specific. Every model was an experiment in simplification. Every design choice was aimed at reducing complexity, reducing the number of parts, and reducing the skill required to assemble the final product. In 1908, Ford introduced the Model T. It was not the best-looking car on the market. It was not the fastest. It was not the most comfortable. But it was light, durable, simple to operate, simple to repair, and priced at $850. Within a year, Ford had more orders than he could fill. The Model T solved a specific set of problems that other manufacturers had ignored. Its high ground clearance handled the unpaved, rutted roads that covered most of rural America. Its engine was simple enough that a farmer with basic tools could fix most problems without a mechanic. Its parts were standardized, meaning replacements were available and affordable. Ford had not just designed a car, he had designed a car for the actual conditions in which most Americans lived. But the Model T's success created a new problem. Demand was exceeding production capacity. Ford's factory in Detroit used the same basic production method as every other car manufacturer. Skilled workers moved from one stationary car to the next, performing different tasks at each station. It was slow, inconsistent, and expensive. If Ford wanted to lower the price further and meet growing demand, he needed an entirely different way of building cars. In 1910, Ford opened a new factory in Highland Park, Michigan. Over the next 3 years, he and his production team, including engineers like Charles Sorensen and Peter Martin, developed and implemented the moving assembly line. The concept was not entirely new. Meatpacking plants in Chicago had used overhead conveyor systems to move animal carcasses past stationary workers. Ford adapted this principle to automobile manufacturing, but applied it with a level of precision and scale that had never been attempted in any industry. The idea was simple. Instead of workers moving to the car moved to the workers. Each worker stood in one position and performed one task over and over as the chassis rolled past on a conveyor. One man installed the engine, the next attached the transmission, the next mounted the wheels. Every step was timed, every motion was studied, every unnecessary movement was eliminated. The results were immediate and dramatic. Before the assembly line, building a single Model T chassis took over 12 hours. After the line was fully implemented in 1913, it took 93 minutes. Production volume increased exponentially. The price of the Model T dropped every year. By 1924, you could buy one for $260. Adjusted for wages, That meant an average factory worker could purchase a new car with roughly 4 months of pay. No product of that mechanical complexity had ever been made available at that price point to that many people. Ford had not just improved manufacturing, he had invented a new relationship between production cost and consumer access. The assembly line made mass production possible, and mass production made mass consumption possible. That sequence, production efficiency creating affordability, creating demand, creating more production, became the foundational economic loop of the 20th century. The resistance to Ford's system came not from competitors, but from his own workforce. Assembly line work was repetitive, exhausting, and dehumanizing. Workers performed the same motion hundreds of times per day. The pace was controlled by the speed of the line, not by the worker. Turnover was enormous. In 1913, Ford had to hire more than 50,000 workers in a single year just to maintain a workforce of 14,000. Men would work for a few days or weeks and then quit. Ford's response to this crisis became one of the most discussed business decisions in American history. On January 5, 1914, he announced that Ford Motor Company would pay its workers $5 per day, more than double the average industrial wage. The workday was also reduced from 9 hours to 8. The announcement generated national headlines. Other industrialists called Ford a traitor to his class. The Wall Street Journal accused him of applying spiritual principles where they did not belong. Critics predicted the company would go bankrupt. None of that happened. The $5 day solved the turnover problem almost overnight. Workers lined up by the thousands outside the Highland Park plant. Ford could now select the most reliable workers and retain them. Productivity increased. Training costs dropped. Absenteeism fell. The math worked. Paying workers more cost less than constantly replacing them. If you are finding this useful for understanding how modern work and industry were shaped, subscribing helps us continue producing these documentaries. They take considerable time to research and verify. But the $5 day came with conditions that are often left out of the simplified version of the story. Ford created a department called the Sociological Department, staffed with investigators who visited workers' homes to verify that they were living according to Ford's personal standards. Workers had to be married or supporting a family. They could not drink excessively. They had to keep clean homes. Immigrant workers were required to attend English language and Americanization classes. Workers who failed these inspections did not receive the full $5. Ford viewed his workforce not just as labor, but as a market and a social project. He wanted his workers to buy Model Ts. He also wanted them to live in a way he considered respectable. The $5 day was generous and controlling at the same time. It improved material conditions for thousands of families, while simultaneously placing those families under corporate surveillance. The broader economic effects of Ford's system reshaped the country within a single generation. The automobile required roads. Federal and state governments began investing in paved highway systems. The Federal Aid Road Act of 1916 and the Federal Highway Act of 1921 directed millions of dollars toward road construction. An entirely new public infrastructure system was built, largely in response to the demand Ford had created. The automobile required fuel. The oil industry, already large due to kerosene and industrial lubricants, expanded dramatically to meet gasoline demand. Gas stations appeared across the country. Refineries scaled up. The relationship between the American economy and petroleum became structural and permanent. The automobile enabled suburban development. Before the car, most workers lived within walking distance of their jobs. With a car, a worker could live miles from a factory or office and commute daily. Developers began building residential neighborhoods outside city centers. The suburb, as a distinct American way of living, was made possible by affordable personal transportation. Retail changed. Roadside businesses, motels, drive-in restaurants, and shopping centers emerged to serve a driving population. The geography of commerce shifted from dense urban centers to highway corridors and suburban strips. Employment changed. The automobile industry itself became one of the largest employers in the country, but the resistance industries were even larger. Rubber manufacturing, glass production, steel fabrication, road construction, petroleum extraction, auto parts suppliers, repair shops, and insurance companies all grew in direct response to the automobile's dominance. By the 1920s, 1 in every 9 American workers was employed in an industry connected to the car. Ford Motor Company dominated the market through the early 1920s. At its peak, the Model T accounted for more than half of all automobiles sold in the United States. But Ford's greatest strength became his critical weakness. He refused to change. By the mid-1920s, General Motors under Alfred Sloan had introduced a strategy of annual model changes, multiple price tiers, and consumer choice in color and features. Chevrolet offered cars that were slightly more expensive than the Model T, but far more modern in appearance and comfort. Consumers, now accustomed to owning a car, wanted variety. They wanted style. They wanted options. Ford resisted. He believed the Model T was a perfect product that needed no replacement. He reportedly said that customers could have any color they wanted, as long as it was black. He dismissed styling as wasteful. He dismissed consumer preference as irrational. He kept producing the same car while the market moved past him. By 1927, Ford was forced to shut down production of the Model T and retool his factories for the Model A. The shutdown lasted nearly a year and cost the company its market leadership. General Motors overtook Ford and held the top position for decades. Ford's personal views also became increasingly problematic as he aged. In the 1920s, he published a newspaper called The Dearborn Independent, which ran a series of anti-Semitic articles over several years. The articles blamed Jewish people for a range of social and economic problems and promoted conspiracy theories that had no factual basis. The series was widely circulated and later compiled into a set of booklets that were distributed internationally. Ford eventually issued an apology in 1927 under legal and public pressure, but the damage to his reputation was significant and lasting. During the 1930s, Ford resisted unionization of his workforce more aggressively than any other major automaker. While General Motors and Chrysler eventually negotiated with the United Auto Workers Union, Ford held out. His security chief, Harry Bennett, employed intimidation and violence against union organizers. The most documented incident occurred in 1937 at the Battle of the Overpass, where Ford security personnel physically attacked union representatives, including Walter Reuther, in front of news photographers. Ford Motor Company did not recognize the UAW until 1941. Ford's management style in his later years became erratic and authoritarian. He undermined capable executives, reversed decisions without explanation, and maintained personal control over a company that had grown too large for one person to manage effectively. By the time of his death in 1947, at the age of 83, the company was in serious financial difficulty and required a complete restructuring under his grandson, Henry Ford II. The system Ford built did not decline with him. It expanded. The assembly line method spread to virtually every manufacturing industry in the world. Electronics, appliances, clothing, food processing, and military equipment were all produced using variations of the system Ford pioneered at Highland Park. The basic principle: break a complex process into simple, repeatable steps and move the product past stationary workers, remains the foundation of industrial manufacturing today. The economic model Ford demonstrated, that paying workers enough to become consumers of the product they build creates a self-sustaining cycle of production and demand, became a core assumption of 20th-century economic policy. The post-war American middle class was built, in significant part, on the logic that high wages and affordable goods could coexist if production was efficient enough. The physical landscape Ford's system created is still the dominant American geography. Suburbs, highways, strip malls, drive-through restaurants, parking lots, commuter culture, and oil dependency are all direct consequences of a transportation system organized around the private automobile. American cities were rebuilt in the mid-20th century to accommodate cars, often at the expense of public transit, walkable neighborhoods, and urban density. The environmental consequences were not considered in Ford's time and are now among the most significant challenges facing the global economy. Carbon emissions from automobiles contribute substantially to climate change. Urban sprawl consumes agricultural land and natural habitat. Oil dependency shapes foreign policy and military strategy. These are not unintended side effects of Ford's system. They are structural outcomes of an economy designed around a single product. Henry Ford did not predict any of this. He wanted to build a car that a farmer could afford. He wanted to prove that efficiency and accessibility were more profitable than exclusivity. He succeeded on both counts. But the system he created did not stop where he intended it to. It kept going, reshaping cities, economies, labor relations, energy systems, and the daily patterns of billions of people in ways that no single individual could have controlled or fully understood. The assembly line is still running. The suburbs are still spreading. The highways are still crowded. The fuel is still burning. The world still runs, in large part, on the system Henry Ford put into motion in a factory in Highland Park over a century ago.